This thing's still going live. Are you serious? Thank you. Christ almighty.
I'm Jeremy Block. Welcome to our fourth Screenwriters Lecture in conjunction with Lucy Gard and the JJ Charitable Trust. We are, as you can imagine, hugely honoured to have as our next speaker the four-time BAFTA-winning, two-time Oscar-winning writer and director Alfonso Cuarón. His films include Y Tu Mamá También, Children of Men, Gravity, and his latest masterpiece, Roma. I will be moderating a Q&A followed as always by questions from the floor. But before I do, I'd like to give a context to what Alfonso is going to talk to. He became the first Mexican to win the Best Director Award, both at the BAFTAs and at the Oscars. Two other Mexican filmmakers have since gone on to achieve the same. The Mexican new wave that swept across our screens in the late 90s and 2000s made the world acutely aware of the creative talent coming out of that country. The beautiful storytelling that has emerged from Mexico in the last 20 years is a testament to Alfonso's pioneering talent. And I'd like to welcome him on stage to talk about the cultural shift that allowed such a wealth of talent to emerge from one place. Ladies and gentlemen, Alfonso Cuarón.
Oh, I thought it was going to be a conversation. So it's just I'm so unprepared to give any speech, but no, I'm very happy to be here. And as we were talking before, the reason I'm so excited is that rarely screenplay is given a place in terms of the conversation of filmmaking. There's so much to go to, obviously, to actors and the director's process, and rarely it's really explored the process of the screenwriter. I consider myself probably a screenwriter before I'm a filmmaker, and that is that just as a matter of process, there's a whole is the process of the thought out of making your film. Even when I'm a director as well, and as a director, I'm as free as strong is that thought out process, and that thought out process is reflected in that screenplay. I believe that cinema is a language in its own form. It's in its own right. It's a language that requires a lot of different tools. The different tools, you have sound, you have performance, and of course, for certain kind of films, the films that I do, the narrative films, the screenplay is kind of the fundamental tool. But those screenplays should be serving. It's very different to write serving a literary material, meaning something that is going to be that the purpose of that is to be read in a book, as opposed to something in which the goal and the end of it is to be seen on screen. So I think as a screenwriters, we need to recognize that film language, how this particular art in which narrative is constraining time. And that's something that I find it very beautiful, because when you're reading a book, a piece of a novel, you get immersed, you get lost in those pages. But you're not bounded by time. And what I find is that the sense of time bounds us with the now. When we are experiencing a film, we are, in one hand, lost in that in that universe, in that experience, but by the same token, we are breathing that experience for as long as it lasts. You know, a book can last. You can read a book in 2 days or in 4 weeks. A film, you end up watching just the length of it. And I think that that's something that is so important in the process of screenwriting, is that sense of the experience that we're going to have in real time. And I mean, frankly, I prefer to expand this into a conversation, and more importantly, to have the conversation with you, if that's okay.
Please sit down. Let me come and sit here.
I'm going to steal this.
To steal the tea. Steal the tea.
Yes.
Great.
And again, I'm sorry, I was so unprepared for that.
No, not at all. Not at all. I know. Cozy, huh?
Yeah.
They're cozy.
Yeah.
So, first of all, Alfonso, thank you so much for taking the time out to come and talk to us. You mentioned there the
Okay, so there's the medals on the Repentia squad primarily. So we can now move on to the gold. I think that's the most logical thing to do next, because there's a lot of it. It's not a lot, but I guess I could also do the first layer of the reds on these things. Let's do that, because I don't have to dry before I apply the highlights. So we'll lay a layer of red down. So that we can then go back and do
the importance and significance of time in film and in the filmed experience. Can I begin by taking us back a bit to the beginning of your career? And I want to just begin by asking you, you studied philosophy, then you studied film in Mexico. What, at that time when you were young and unknown, were your cinematic inspirations? What were you looking to? Who were you going to hear talking, or what films were talking to you at that time and inspiring you?
Well, it depends on which period.
So I'm talking about when you were a student at university studying.
Oh, when I was, yeah. Yeah. The thing is, I was studying philosophy and film at the same time.
Right.
And so one thing was pretty much informing the other. And this was the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of, in terms of cinema, there was what it was the new German cinema.
Yeah.
You know, the Nouvelle Vogue was still kind of ringing, but there was the post-Nouvelle, Nouvelle Vogue, the people like Alan Tanner.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, together with that, there was all these crazy experiments from the Germans.
Yeah.
So it was pretty much a lot of European. That whole period was marked by a lot of contemporary European filmmakers, and this beautiful period of the Italians of the 70s.
Right.
I'm talking about the Taviani, particularly the Taviani, who were like my favorite.
Yeah, yeah. You've talked in the past in interviews about your personal experience of life in Mexico. You've used the word being scarring. Can you talk a bit about how that translated into the first film that you co-wrote with your brother Carlos, Y Tu Mama Tambien?
Yeah.
What was the inspiration for that film, and how did that screenplay emerge from the memories that you brought to it? How did that evolve?
Well, but there was a completely different period than my study years. That was probably 12 years after.
Yes.
And during that period, that's the funny thing about how life works.
Yes.
Because at that time, I was kind of recovering or trying to recoup. I was very into American cinema of the 40s.
Right.
And particularly the 40s, maybe 30s, I was in love with Lubitsch, and Billy Wilder.
Billy Wilder and I.L. Diamond. Yeah.
Yeah. And
they co-wrote, of course.
They co-wrote, yeah.
With martinis.
With a lot of martinis.
With a lot of martinis.
Yeah. So that's the reason I wanted to
of course.
So it was this whole idea of rhythm.
Yes.
And with Carlos, my brother, he's a writer, and we would talk so much about rhythm.
Yes.
And we wanted to do something that was precisely honoring that sense of rhythm. It was, and that was the focus. But it was a period. I have to say, I'm a late bloomer in film. I admire filmmakers that from the first film they already get it. It took me a while to get it. It took me many years to start, and I haven't got it yet. What I'm saying is, people, but to start having the sense, the notion of it. It took me a while. And I'd say in my early films, it was always just trying to really do something that worked. If I was just so satisfied, even with Lubezki, my collaborator, the cinematographer, we would say, if we do one scene that is good, we're happy.
Yeah. When, because you talked about rhythm, often screenwriters talk about the music of a screenplay, and there are analogies, I think, that work very effectively with music. There is a sense that one is orchestrating a story. Can you talk a bit about how the storytelling?
That's it. That's the whole idea. Oh, maybe. Oh.
Telling of Ijimama Tambien evolved. So what really strikes me about it as a screenplay, even though the screenplay is invisible, is that you are telling a very intimate story against a backdrop that's as important. So the environment of their world, the disjunction between privilege and poverty, the rites of passage that those boys go through with Louisa. Did you evolve what's become something that I recognize in your work, this parallel between character and environment? Did that evolve as a conversation with Carlos? Was that something that you were consciously imprinting in your script, or did you learn it as you went along?
Yeah, in that the thing is, when the way that Y Tu Mamá También happened was after many years of that I consider maybe that I lost many years of my creative life, being allowing myself to follow the siren call of Hollywood, and that was informed precisely by going back to the reasons why I love film. One day I was very frustrated, and I went. We still have video shops at that time, video places, and I was living in New York. I went and I just rented a bunch. There was like 20-something videos.
Yeah.
I locked myself in my house, and great delivery food in New York, by the way, and I watched film after film of the films that I would just go through the video thing and start getting stuff that I recognized that they were the reasons why I loved cinema.
Yes.
And I was watching one after the other, and it was the recognition again of this thing of film is not just this thing of illustrated pictures. You know, it's that pictures that illustrate stories. Film is something way more complex than that, and and also the recognition that cinema doesn't owe anything to literature.
No, absolutely not.
Or to drama, or to painting. Cinema is way more similar to music.
Completely agree.
You know, it's an art that flows in time, that also is an abstract language that flows with themes.
But it has the added complexity that at the same time, one is still having to stitch together a narrative that's coherent. And that's one of the beauties of what I feel you've achieved in your work. But I can see it nascent in Y Tu Mamá También, the ability both to control rhythm and tone, but to also tell a story that's incredibly enthralling, the story of these boys and their sexual awakening, and the story of their rites of passage from a kind of innocent sexual bravado.
Yeah, but the simple thing, because I remember when I started writing with Carlos, after I finished that period, I called my brother and said, hey, let's write a screenplay.
Yeah.
Come to New York, let's write a screenplay.
Yeah.
I said, okay. And he went there, and we started talking about this. The basic premise of Y Tu Mamá También, of the two kids going with an older woman, is something that we had for 10 years or 12 years. Actually, before doing my first film, was one of the choices to do. And I'm glad we didn't do it, because we start talking about that, and we start talking about how by itself how uninteresting it was. That it was just it was a silly, funny story.
Yeah, the frat movie story. Yeah,
the front.
Yeah.
But we start talking about. It was more interesting to explore who these characters were, and to explore how their social class and the social context inform characters.
Yes.
And how these characters, by the same token, inform that environment.
Of course.
Because coming back to your question, and that's what we started. The whole writing process was to be conscious about the tension of those.
To stay aware
of those two layers.
Implicit in that is an anxiety that sometimes overwhelms other screenwriters, because you're trying to hold an awareness of it as a piece of music and as something that's tonally very pure unto itself, but at the same time to tell a story. One of the things you do in Y Tu Mamá También, which I think is very bold, is you use third-person voiceover. And I'm interested to know, as a writer, whether you deployed the third-person voiceover from very early on, or whether that was a discovery.
No, it was already. What was part of the reason why doing the voiceover? I remember when I mentioned Carlos, and we need a voiceover. He said, I refused to do the screenplay. Because I'm not going to do the Wonder Years. And I said, well, no, it's not the Wonder Years. And I said, there's a piece of music that I love, and he loves from a German composer called Heinze.
Yes.
That is called Tristan, in which it has these beautiful interludes of very melodic stuff, and then suddenly those pieces are brutally interrupted, and there's this narration of this child.
Right.
And what it happens is it just takes you out emotionally to get into a more reflective state.
The whole thing.
And then springs back into these interludes, and the result of that is an amazing emotional depth. And then we start talking about Brecht, and the whole Brecht. I don't know in English how you call the distance.
Alienation.
Alienation, the Brechtian alienation. Yeah. How taking you out to engage rationally into the whole process. And then he starts saying, okay, and then I show him I think it was masculine and feminine,
Right.
that he hasn't seen. And he started watching and says, okay, I get it. I get
what the voiceover is doing.
Stop lecturing. And let's
Stop telling me. Yeah.
And that was the process. And it was from there in the screenplay. In the screenplay, it's described that the narrator comes out with no other sound.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. And it's very noticeable, actually. The sound is killed, and then the voice comes in.
Yeah, it's killed for a few seconds.
Yes, and it has precisely that Brechtian effect of taking you out for a second because you're aware that nothing's happening, and then the voice cuts in. There's a particularly we haven't been able to bring the clip up, unfortunately, for reasons of copyright. But there's a really lovely moment in the car. I'm going to describe it if I can.
Really, you have copyright issues?
I don't know what's happened, but anyway, we're not allowed to show it, which is very, very frustrating. So I'm going to paint a picture with words.
Okay.
There is the moment in the car where Julio and Tanika are boasting to Luisa about their manifesto.
Yeah.
And then there's a moment of silence, and then the voiceover tells us about their private inhibitions, their intimate inhibitions, the loo seat. For me, that's one of the most extraordinary moments in the film, because it deploys voiceover as both alienating but incredibly intimate and incredibly telling about the boys. In the writing, is that in the screenplay? Is that how written is that? And how much did you discover that as you worked with your actors?
No, all of that was written in the screenplay.
Good.
Well,
that's
what we do.
This is exactly, but this is something that I think people. We were talking about this, weren't we, earlier? And we'll address it again with Roma. But it's something that it's a misconception about the screenwriting process, particularly with auteurs like yourself, that in some way or other, vision is ultimately the property of the director on the set, whereas in actual fact, what you do in the screenplay is to master the structure and the dialogue and everything, so that you can then liberate yourself. Does that make?
Well, yeah, totally. I mean, it's two things. It's the screenplay, but as important as the screenplay is the thought out process.
Yes.
To get to that screenplay.
Yes.
And the more thought out the whole thing is, as a director, when I arrive to the set, I'm free. You know, I can improvise.
Yes.
In Tu Mama también, then we would be free to improvise. Most of the time, it was a full circle going back to the script.
Yes.
But also, even if you find new scenes, are only because everything was so thought out, and you have this amazing safety net.
Yes.
You know, in which you can fall and you're going to be fine. You know.
I'm interested in when you mentioned improvisation. When I work with American actors, they very often treat the script as a rough guide, which is deeply frustrating if you've spent 15 or 20 drafts. Is there a sense that the improvisation is as much an opportunity for the actors to find their character? You say that they come back to the screenplay. How often in your experience have improvisations changed the nature of the scene that you'd written beforehand?
It's not about changing the nature of the scene. It's about making it alive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one thing is also I recognize I'm writing. I have my conception, but then I'm going to be dealing with humans that they have their own ways of moving.
Yes.
And own ways of talking, in which sometimes the rhythm that I'm setting in the page are not compared.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm not Tarantino. Tarantino is amazing doing that. You know, he's a writer that is about the rhythm of his dialogue.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
My approach is a different approach. Is about trying to find the rhythm of the character.
Right.
You know, and in Tu Mama también, very often what happened is that Carlos and we are older than Gael and Diego, and they were just making fun, Gael and Diego, of our slang.
Right. Right.
And then they would change to their the slang, and it was fantastic.
Yes.
By the way, I'm so happy because now younger people are making fun of their slang. Yeah, so happy about
That's
that.
right.
Yeah. So that kind of stuff, and Y Tu Mamá También, what we would do is, the improvisation of Y Tu Mamá También was that here's the script, here are the pages, this is the dialogue.
Yeah.
Now, and it was all the time running each one of the scenes. We would say, we're going to improvise like 1 minute or 2 minutes before the scene begins.
Yes.
Then we engage into the scene, and we're not going to cut. You keep on improvising until I cut.
Yes.
And that was more the improvisation.
Yes.
I
understand.
And that improvisation sometimes would inform something that was already written.
Yes.
But it was in the context of what was already there.
Sure. We've touched on this, but in all your films, the environment is as important as the characters, and never more so than in Children of Men. Let's talk a bit about that film and how that development process differed from Y Tu Mamá También. I know that obviously for a start, it's a P.D. James novel, so it's an adaptation rather than public domain or personal. How was the experience of developing that screenplay different from Y Tu Mamá También for you as a writer?
It was not that different because I never read P.D. James' book.
Right. You heard it here first.
What I read was a synopsis that was sent to me, 1 page.
Yes.
And it triggered, and I found the whole thing brilliant.
Yes.
And it triggered this idea. I was very intrigued about it was 2000, and year 2000, and I was very intrigued about the things that were going to shape the new century.
Yeah.
And when I read that, and it was very serendipitous because it happened at the same time, when I read that, I said, whoa, this is an amazing opportunity to talk about this. And immediately a movie came in my head, and I start like the mental process and of drafting. How would it go?
Yeah.
So I started working with Tim Sexton, a collaborator, and Tim said, should we read the book? And says, I don't want to read the book because I don't want to detour from this idea.
Yeah.
He says, but you read it, and maybe if you think that there's something relevant, let me know. And he said, there's another screenplay was written. He says, I'm not interested, but you read it if you want. So he read the stuff and says, okay, so he says, well, there's the book that is absolutely brilliant, is really good, but has nothing to do with what we're doing.
Right.
Is the character of Julianne Moore is the one who's burying the baby.
Right. Okay, that's pretty different.
There are no immigrants.
Yeah.
Is about, it's more about this authoritarian society.
Yeah.
More like a leader, more kind of Orwellian leader that is running the whole thing. And I was interested about making a democratic society that is going to be burned, the edge of things, just a little bit like today.
Yes.
And about immigration and all these other things. And the screenplay was just like a straight adaptation of the novels. It's not even that good. So let's just stick to the plan. And from then on, it was a similar process, because the process was about how we were going to inform all these other things, because I was doing a lot of research about what was shaping.
You were reading Naomi Klein and John Gray, weren't you?
And John Gray, and the good misanthropist.
Yes, John Gray. The very nihilistic John Gray.
Is brilliant.
Yes, brilliant.
And people like Todorov and Zizek and Sasha Saskin and a lot of thinkers, and that started to inform the whole background, the whole thing. Also, we wanted a lot of the stuff just be, like not. I don't know if it's symbolic or of metaphorical elements, because there was a lot of also a little bit of Foucault and
Yes.
and an echo in the process. So and as we were doing that, as we were doing it, it was about engaging the two stories, the foreground and the background.
Foreground and background story.
So making one and the same.
Yeah, which I think is a feature of your work. Coincidentally, you mentioned all those thinkers that you were working with. I know that our audience often ask this question about research. Some screenwriters find it a black hole into which they never emerge, never come back into the light, because research can overwhelm you. How do you deal with what you beautifully described once as the tapestry of information, which I loved as a description of research? How do you deal with the necessary moment where you draw that down into a document? How do you stop yourself from flying off into the research and never returning? What's for you the process? Do you write treatments? Do you write structure? How do you bring all those notes down to a script?
Well, it's very dangerous. Research is super dangerous. I've been lost in that Bermuda Triangle.
We all have. Yes, exactly.
It's a Bermuda Triangle.
It is.
And it's
really
terrible.
Yeah.
When things have been good, it's been like in Children of Men or even Gravity, in which before anything else, it was like a strong concept, a strong idea of the narrative.
The initiating idea.
The narrative and how it was going to flow from the A to Z.
Yeah.
And even putting down in paper some of that stuff.
Yes.
And then the research starts to
inform.
It's not because sometimes inform, but sometimes then the research starts taking the foreground, and your characters the background, but just following that structure that you already put. Right before doing Roma, I was not going to do Roma. I didn't know I was going to do Roma. For a couple of years, I developed a project with my brother Carlos that dealt with humans 100,000 years ago, early humans.
Right.
Not an adventure; it was more a domestic drama.
Yep.
But 100,000 years ago.
Have you read *Sapiens*, Yuval Harari's book about?
Yeah. Well, that was one of many. No, that came at the end of my research. No, because I was more talking with amazing people here at the Natural History Museum, and reading a bunch of books of very specific things about early grains, or early theories of language, theories of how language was created. Books about just fire, cooking, and stuff, like very, very specific things. So much. Also relation Neanderthal, Sapiens, and the other species of humans.
Homo erectus and all the others,
No, yes, the Daranidians and all of those other guys. And so much that then we started writing the screenplay when I felt that I had all this knowledge.
Yes.
And what starts happening is that I was so obsessed about all of that information to be conveyed in the screenplay.
Yes.
And at the end, I got lost. There was the story more or less that we had set up to do, except it was kind of dry. It was kind of it was not making really. It was making sense, a lot of sense, but it was. I didn't find the angle.
No.
I stopped finding the angle. I find it interesting, but I want to go back to that story eventually, but now free myself from all of that stuff. And that happened right before Roma, and that's the danger of it. Is that I think that research, it's an amazing, it's this tapestry in which you access but it should not be the one leading the game.
No. So you reached a hiatus with that project, and then you went on to Roma. We'll come on to Roma in a moment. I just want to go back to Children of Men, and another very powerful disjunction that you deal with in a lot of your work between privilege and poverty. And there's a moment in Children of Men where Theo and Nigel are talking about the art that's collected, Guernica, etc., ostensibly to save it for humanity, but really as decor. And there's a moment in Roma, and if you haven't seen Roma, it's a masterpiece, and I will try not to put too many spoilers in, but there's a moment where the forest is on fire and the privileged members of the party are still drinking cocktails, and some of them are just staring at this devastation in a kind of numb way. You've talked about green spaces and about the importance of people breaking out and thinking more collectively. Can you talk a little bit about where that comes from in your life and how important that is to you?
Well, I guess that it comes just from one experience informs the next experience. Mexico is a country in which you have it's impossible to go through Mexico and not to see contradictions all the time.
Yeah.
Not to see the most amazing, beautiful places and the most beautiful expressions of generosity, together with misery and atrocities. Developed world is different because the developed world outsources that misery.
Yes.
Yes. And has created these green zones that those green zones, even in the developed countries, are becoming narrower and narrower and narrower, because those green zones used to be the countries by themselves, and now even each country is becoming needed to have their green zones, because there's already stuff going on outside those green zones. So when you're growing in a society that is so obvious what is going on around, there's makes you wonder.
Yes. One of the things you did in Children of Men was, I believe, you and your cinematographers agreed that you wanted to try and make London as much like Mexico City as possible. And I'm sure it's no joy to you to discover how clairvoyant that film was, because here we are 12 years later, and the immigration crisis and the climate chaos that we now have right around us was there in that film.
Yeah, but there were people were warning about that for decades now.
Yeah, but very few people were listening.
Yeah, but it was not a topic trend, I guess.
Yeah.
And what is amazing is that now everybody, even people saying in Children of Men, oh, look at that.
Mm-hmm.
I was just, these people were talking about that like 2 decades ago, and now it's happening. All of these things that we're living it was completely predicted 2 decades ago.
Yeah.
Immigration, environment, this whole thing of the populism and authoritarian states. I mean, this is reality. Really, there are no news. No,
it's not news. No. You while you were developing Children of Men, you directed a Harry Potter. And I don't really want to talk about Harry Potter, but I wanted to ask one question with regards to that, just in terms of storytelling, and to ask whether there were any elements of the storytelling that you were engaged in that influenced you as you went on, or whether that was a bespoke experience. Did you take anything from that experience from Harry Potter as a storyteller?
Oh, it was just a joy to see that. First of all, you're engaging into something that has so much goodwill.
Yes.
So there's a joy to do that.
Yes.
You're engaging in something that is beloved. That the source material is absolutely brilliant. And my only concern was rather than to do a fantasy as it was in the previous two films, it was more to try to understand these characters as people that really exist.
Yes.
You know, because that's like the great thing. What I love of the J.K. Rowling's books is that everything has a reference to real life, and that was the process of doing that. You know, and it was for me. What the challenging thing is, I was not. I had never done, and I was not used to do films that that have so much scope in terms of characters and stories and so much plotting and that was so much fun.
Yeah.
I have to say that from the narrative standpoint,
yes,
it's very joyful.
Yes.
You know, and besides that, it was as a director, it was just my kindergarten for visual effects. And it was brilliant. It was just and another side effect is that Children of Men was the film I was going to do before Harry Potter, and they didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And after Harry Potter, they gave me the green light.
Exactly.
So that was another very good. The magic of Harry Potter.
The magic of Harry Potter. So talking of visual effects, Gravity. Now I'm interested again, as always, here at this particular series in the process of developing that as a screenplay. The thing that comes across so powerfully and poignantly is the theme of grief and how grief is expressed visually by a world without anchors, and a world in which death is, or even annihilation is, split seconds away. Can I ask you about how that screenplay evolved with your son Jonas, and how you dealt with the fact that you didn't have the conventional tropes of story, plot, narrative that, say, you have in Harry Potter? How did that come about, and what did you do to meet that challenge in the screenplay?
Well, that I owe to Jonas. And actually the stories that he wrote a screenplay of another film that he directed called Desierto. And he had a very early draft, and I was reading that and said, this is brilliant, because he was making a big political statement in the context of a non-stop chase film. You know, and the funny thing is, this is one of those films that now, when it came out 4 years ago or so, it was kind of not really, people didn't pay any picked up. Yeah. And now there is time to pick up, and that because of everything that is happening in the U.S. border, Mexico-U.S. border. Yeah. So, and I said, well, this is great. You know, I would love to do something like this, bold as this. And because he kept on saying, look, I like your films are all right. He says, sure. It's just that, you know, you tend to be very kind of rhetoric. And I get bored with that.
Right.
He said. And the whole challenge was, okay, how to do a film in which we could convey the information or the emotion or the thematic elements without talking about them. You know, and then we took the point of reference we took. We start talking about doing this and says, well, let's do this, but what if we do this trying to bring it in a big scope? Yeah. You know, in a big scope, but at the same time to make a big scale, but at the same time making it absolutely
intimate story about
a very intimate story. And we were talking a lot about Dead Man Escapes by Bresson, you know, which is a film that is about a man escaping a prison. That thematically is about many other things, you know, but in reality,
that's the framing device.
But in reality, what you're watching is actually a quite exciting story about the man escaping a prison, and that was the point of departure for Gravity. And it was about that it was this thing. He said, "Is let's make the images count."
Yes.
You know, let's make the images be the part of that thematic elements that you sometimes do into rhetoric with characters.
Yes, and again, not wishing to bang on about screenplays, but presumably all those visual images that are so rich and the very stripped down cinema that's very, very, very low on dialogue of any kind. Presumably that's all written in, but before you start shooting something as massive as that, I imagine.
Well, you didn't have any choice because something was kind of tough and sometimes frustrating of Gravity is that we were constrained by the technology.
Right.
So we had to, everything, even the performance, Sandra Bullock, that I admire her performance because she was so constrained about timings, about rhythms, about stuff that was already done. I mean, we had done a draft with Sandra doing a voiceover, just like reading the whole thing.
Yes.
To try to get her cadence and her rhythm, but then she had to reproduce not exactly the same performance, but the timings.
Yes.
You know, so everything was very constrained.
So there was a lot of technical constraints around it. Yeah, sure.
A lot of them.
Sure. One of the themes that runs through all your work, that is particularly vivid in Gravity, is, for want of a better word, the notion of incarnation, of birth, rebirth, of stillbirth. There's the extraordinary moment in Children of Men where that Christ-like baby walks through the war zone and everybody just stops. And then there's Sandra Bullock in the fetal position. And then in Roma, there's the stillbirth. Can you talk a little bit about what you're exploring when those images occur to you? What is it that's bringing those ideas into the films that you write?
Well, a lot of that is instinctual.
Yes.
You know? Recently someone commented about those things, and the funny thing is I was not really that aware of that, of the connection of those things. Yeah, there's also someone commented that most of my films finish in the water.
I didn't notice that. No.
And I haven't noticed that.
No, I haven't noticed that. But I am very aware that
and I think that my own explanation is that I have very little imagination to keep on going to some things.
I think again, I think people dispute that. Let's talk a bit about Roma, and I'm aware that we should give half an hour to our friends here because I know they'll want to talk to you. Just briefly on Roma, that's an intensely personal film. What do you do to meet the challenge of drawing down memories into a multi-layered complex story? What was the challenge there for you in the screenwriting? Because memorial material from memory can very often, rather like research, take you down a rabbit hole. How did you control the material in the writing?
This is contradicting everything that we talk about because my process of Roma is unlike any other process I've done in any other film, in any front of my filmmaking experience, not as a writer, director, even cinematographer, anything. Right. The process of Roma was, when it manifested the idea, it had three pillars. And those are things that I respect, and I don't move, are unmovable. When I have some idea manifest, comes with certain pillars, and you just they are there. One is that it was about this character Cleo, based upon one person, you know, that a woman who raised me. That is part of this. I'm part of her family. That the process, the tool was going to be memory, and that it was going to be in black and white. Those were the only three things. And so the process started to be memory, and that it was about all the research that usually do in books and talking with experts. It was just like getting lost in memories. And the thing with memories is that it's like this corridor with many, with an infinite number of doors. That each door that you open leads you to another infinite corridor within an infinite number of doors, and you keep on going from door to door, and you get lost in in what Borges talks about, calls the place of the gallery of shutter opaque mirrors. Because you start getting lost in door after door after door after door, and I allow myself to get lost. And as I was getting lost, it was new details where, and this is the thing. Once that you open a door, it's just that many other memories manifest. It's it was kind of very interesting, and more interesting when I start bouncing those memories with a real life Claire, and just and then learning about her memories. And it was a whole process like that. And when I felt that I had, and that I have reached like that point, I just sat to write, and I wrote the whole thing. And this is the thing: I've never written a screenplay for more than 3 weeks. I believe that screenplay you write in 3 weeks or 30 years. There's no time in between.
Everybody take note.
Yes. Is and I'm talking about the first draft, obviously.
Sure.
But in Roma, there was only one draft, because I decided that what I was going to do is sit and start writing without any consideration to length, any consideration to character structure, any kind of structure, plot points, or anything. Just sit and write, almost like a automatic writing, free, and trusting, being irresponsibly enough or very arrogant to think that I have developed a narrative muscle throughout the years that would take care of everything. And I would just write. I wrote for 3 weeks. I finished the screenplay, and I never read it again. And nobody ever read that screenplay. Not the actors, not the crew. Nobody read the screenplay. The only person who had the only one was my partner, David Lindy from Participant Films. He said, "Well, I need a screenplay just because of insurance. Otherwise, I cannot pay the money." I says, "Yes, but it's for your eyes only." I said, "Yes, for my eyes only. Just give me a draft." And gave him the draft. It was in Spanish. He doesn't speak Spanish, so it was. And I opened this. I would open the pages, but I would never read the screenplay from A to Z to check structure, stuff like that. And because I didn't want anything to taint the process. I didn't show it to my old collaborators like Alejandro González Iñárritu, Guillermo del Toro, Pavel Papikovsky, or Carlos, my brother. I didn't want, because I knew that they would give me amazing suggestions that will make me kind of sidetrack. And I didn't want, I just wanted to preserve the purity of those memories and the way they were.
It's a supremely confident thing to do, I think, and it's manifested in the film, which is exquisite. So, bravo. Can we take questions from the floor, because I know they'll be very eager.
Do you remember we were going to just show the whole relationship?
Yes,
because
thank you. Could we just bring up a page of the screenplay?
And for me, it's important to mention this because
so we were having a conversation just before we came out, and the nature of the conversation was about how detailed Alfonso's screenwriting is, and how important it is to get rid of forever the misconception that something as detailed and beautiful as Roma just happens on set. I wonder if you'd like to...
There's a misconception that there are a lot of that happens in this film, or films that I know of filmmakers that are writer-directors, that those are directorial choices. If you read a Guillermo del Toro screenplay, every single detail of anything of the character or the laboratory or anything, the labyrinth of Pan's Labyrinth and stuff, that you would say, okay, that's the director working with the designer. No, everything is so precisely described.
Yeah.
Here, the thing is, if we stop for a moment, because
If you bring it down a bit, actually.
Yeah.
Down.
This is the scene
Okay.
in which a car enters a garage, and when you see the film, you'll see
Stop there.
There's a lot of different cuts, and everything. As a director, I didn't have to do anything but just to follow the screen.
Yes.
You know, and I think it's important because the film follows Roma, and they asked me if those are directorial choices, and I said no, those are writers' choices.
Yes.
In Roma is filled with a lot of foreground background, a lot of description of what is in the background, and everything is in the screenplay.
Yes.
The film is very oral. There's a lot of there are a lot of sounds going on.
Sound is actually a character in the film,
and all the sounds are described in the screenplay.
Yeah.
I mean, there's stuff that then you are looking for locations and you get informed and you add, but those are really little things that you add here and there.
Yeah.
The whole thing, the core of everything, is already described in the screenplay.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important because it's a misconception of sometimes what is the writer and what is the director, going on.
Well, this is a triumphant expression of how important screenplays are.
Kieran talks about the waltz, about the music that is there. There's the engine shuts off, and with it the music, it's when the waltz picks up the rhythm.
Yeah.
All of that is already
and what's
there.
What's remarkable for those who've seen the film and even for those who haven't is that this is the first time a character is introduced. It's the father, and this moment in the film is so predatory, so animal in its power, and it says so much about the man we have not yet seen walk out of the car, and informs so much of what then follows. And thank you so much for sharing that with us, because it's a triumphant expression of what screenwriting should be about. Is it all right if we?
Yeah, no, let's do so.
So we're going to take mics around. We'll start there on the second.
Alfonso, thank you very much for sharing your reflections. I'm just curious to know about legacy and also what you're doing to preserve the future of the Mexican writers and stuff. Because obviously there must be writers out there in the Mexican film community who are still trying to get their voices heard. I mean, are you mentoring people? And in terms of how is the local film industry doing at the present time?
Well, in Mexico, as opposed to the period that I was living in, making films in my generation was very difficult, even more difficult to the generation before mine. Now there's an immense industry in Mexico. And that's good and bad, because in many right now there's it's very good in terms of their jobs, and that's fantastic. A lot of the stuff is not necessarily great. There's a lot of series going on, and none of them, not all of them, amazing. And what happened, the byproduct when there's so much job going on, is that there's a certain sense of discipline that gets lost. Because rather than people that rather staying into one position and learning the craft before moving into another, let's say another position, very soon they become heads of departments. Like that happens with technicians, rather than learning the craft properly and being under, assisting someone who knows a lot, that very soon they have the opportunity to move on and becoming the head of department. And then what happens is that he went to move into being a head of department, but not with all the knowledge that he should have. So it's a great thing. At the same time, there's a bad side effect. Nevertheless, there's, from the standpoint of the creators, it's so damn exuberant what is happening right now. It's really remarkable. I mean, it's I believe that the young generation of filmmakers is the best generation of filmmakers in Mexico, probably in the history of Mexico. And they have an immense confidence. And that is fantastic. The whole thing of Mexican cinema in my generation and the previous generations, there was a lack of really narrative understanding. And now narrative of the young generation is kind of second nature. And some are really exploring very interesting thematic elements. I think that I'm not worried about the legacy of Mexican cinema.
We've got a mic over here. I promise we'll go further.
Yeah, hi. I was curious when it comes to, because I think a lot of people are very impressed by a lot of technical things that happen in your films when it comes to the cinematography and stuff. So I was curious about when you're writing, because you're going to direct, do you in your writing process think about how you're going to, technically approach things? And I suppose the second part of that question would be, do you think you would write differently if you weren't going to direct?
No, I don't think technically when I'm writing. That's the joy of writing, that you're not constrained by technique. That there's sky is the limit when you're writing. So it's fantastic. It's in many ways my favorite. The process of getting to writing, maybe not my favorite, but once that I'm writing, is just you get into the zone and it's so much fun. But the whole thing of the description is the same. I have collaborated with other people writing or co-writing stuff, and what happens is you just try to describe it. This thing is not to be read, it's to be seen, and you try to describe as much as possible. And then I have seen stuff and the choices that other directors they do, and it's great. But then I recognize that it has nothing to do with the visual I was imagining, but it does with the rhythm that you're setting on the page. In terms, maybe did the shot or the thing in a completely different way, but did the shot. It did or let me put this way, did the moment, convey that moment. And it's about that. When we're writing, we're conveying those moments. And so I think the approach is exactly the same. In many ways, I don't think I'm directing when I'm writing. I would be very limited, and I want to be free when I'm writing.
It's a wonderful answer. Is there anybody with their hands up further up there? There. Yeah, I've got you.
Primero, muchísimas gracias. The main question is, like, with people of your caliber, we are seeing so many doing projects on like streaming platforms and things like that. Do you feel there's still kind of like enough sense of wanting to give a shot to newer voices to kind of like move into the streaming platforms, or do you think we should try as newer voices going through the normal path of kind of like smaller production and so on, and then reach out for streaming? Or do you think there's still enough room there for newer voices to develop and to push forward and drive?
I think that there's something that is way greater than platforms and theatrical, that is cinema. Cinema is what is important. The other stuff are the annoying considerations of showing our films in any moment of history. That, I mean, right now is the conversation between streaming and theatrical. Years before was just the consideration of trying to get your film into a theatrical release. It's the only difference I see is that right now is there's a fight in which two two things that had nothing to do with cinema. It's two economic models are fighting, and eventually it's going to come into a balance. But I don't think as a filmmaker we should concern about economic models. We should concern ourselves just in terms of film.
Storytelling. Somebody up at the back there.
Hi. I was just going to say, from when you get your original idea, when you actually start writing the script, obviously with Roma it was different. How much of the plot points do you have in your mind already? And do you do it from beginning to end when you're writing, or do you find it easier to sort of move around the script a little bit?
Yeah, except Roma, that it was a completely responsible process of just going into, writing in a free fall. The other screenplays, I cannot start writing until I feel that in my head I had the beats. Actually, Pavel Pawlikowski, he talks about your 5 moments.
Right.
He talks about you need 5 moments, and that's his process. Mine is different,
Yes.
But I understand what he's talking about. Pavel talks about you have your 5 moments. Once that you have your 5 moments, it's just about
Fine. Yeah.
When you actually start writing this,
Oh my god. My body.
script, obviously with Roma it was different. How much of the plot points do you have in your mind already? And do you do it from beginning to end when you're writing, or do you find it easier to sort of move around the script a little bit?
Yeah, except Roma, that it was a completely responsible process of just going into, writing in a free fall. The other screenplays, I cannot start writing until I feel that in my head I had the beats. Actually, Pavel Pawlikowski, he talks about your 5 moments.
Right.
He talks about you need 5 moments, and that's his in a free fall. The other screenplays, I cannot start writing until I feel that in my head I had the beats. Actually, Pavel Pawlikowski, he talks about your 5 moments.
Right.
He talks about you need 5 moments, and that's his process. Mine is different,
Yes.
But I understand what he's talking about. Pavel talks about you have your 5 moments. Once that you have your 5 moments, it's just about
Fine. Yeah.
finding the flow in between those 5 moments. In my case, yes, I need to understand how I'm entering the whole thing. I need to understand the main conflict, if you mind, and then I need to understand the where is it going to, So if not, I feel very insecure. Except Roma, but because then when I finished the screenplay, because I didn't read it again, to Carlos, my brother, I kept on saying, it's a film that is not narrative. I didn't know it was narrative, in other words, and when finally he saw it, he said, you cheated me, because it's very narrative, it's completely narrative.
Yeah,
but I kept on telling him, I don't know if anybody's going to care about it. I think it's a very abstract thing. But generally speaking, once that I have those things, is when I can do my 3 weeks of just writing.
So I'm not sure where the microphone is, but we have a hand up here in the middle. Thank you. Yeah, and we'll come to you. So there's another one down here on the 3rd or 4th row. Yep.
Related to a lot of the things you're talking about time, the relationship the viewer has and the writer has, the filmmaker has with time. I feel like right now, because of the platforms, not to get too much into it, sometimes as a writer you have a choice: make your screenplay 75 minutes or 8 hours, and we'll go either way. And if it's 8 hours, can you make it 40 hours for the next 5 years? And you're still thinking of it in terms of, I have a story A to Z. I don't know if I can do five moments and fill it in 8 hours, but it's a different type of paradigm we're talking about now, that you have a film that can stretch out. So I just want to know your thought on that. Do you see a place for yourself in that world? And the idea
of an amazing moment. Look, if you consider that the only reason why films are 2 hours long is a convention that was inherited in the early silent films because of commercial considerations. And it was a convention that was inherited from the vaudeville and the theater, and also because it started making sense in terms of the kind of amount of showings that you could give, that you could fit in one day. So if you think about that, cinema inherits just something that is very Philistine. I just one more time, a business model. And what I find that is so exciting nowadays is that cinema is time to get free into exploring uncharted territories. For instance, short films, we call it short films, when if you think about it, some of the masterpieces of the silent films are short films, but they are not short films, they are films. And when you call short film, you're already doing you're calling in a very pejorative way a film. That is not a full film. So, and if you see some works of some amazing masters, are films that sometimes are 10 minutes long or 7 minutes long or 15 minutes long. So I think it's a time to start just erasing those definitions. And also I remember there's a great filmmaker, German filmmaker I love, it's called Soderbergh. That Soderbergh used to do these very crazy things with Wagner operas that they lasted like 7 hours, And it was just such a trip just to watch and sit there and get lost in the madness of that. And right now, I think that's this great opportunity now. I'm talking about cinema. What we're experiencing a lot with platforms is not necessarily cinema. It's more connected with TV. That is a different thing. It's fantastic. It's a great thing. I enjoy them, and there are romps, and I can do my binge watch. But I'm getting lost in a soap or in a series, but not because of the cinematic value of the thing. I'm getting lost in story. In many ways, it's becoming a media for lazy readers. You know, it's what I am more intrigued is about cinema, and what you're talking about of doing stretching your 5 moments or turning why 5 moments? Why do paddle? Do 50 moments? You know, be more like the War and Peace. War and Peace. You know that War and Peace is not 5 moments. You know, so it's about stretching that, but as long as War and Peace has as much literary power as a short story by also Tolstoy, that is A Winter Night, you know. And if you can achieve the whole thing one that in what's this 50 pages as Winter Night, or the 100 pages that is War and Peace, in a cinematic form, now that platforms are giving that opportunity, fantastic. And by the way, that's not to put down series. I enjoy them. I'm writing one, you know, just because it's so much fun. I'm writing one because it's just, you don't have the constraint of the hours. You just keep on developing your character. You keep on developing story. You don't have to telegraph stuff. I think it's amazing.
We have someone down here on the third row.
Yeah, I was interested to know what your advice to screenwriters is on sort of listening to notes, and like when they're, especially kind of producer and financier notes, and when they're useful and when
Those never. No. Listen to them. Nod and say great ideas. Let me think about them. But go on.
I think that's the answer, really.
I think you won't get a more concise or acute answer than that. Is there anyone else with a hand up? So in the middle here, could someone get a microphone?
But by the same token, find you trusted collaborators that are mean to you, and that is fundamental. There's nothing meaner to me than, for instance, Guillermo del Toro. No, and it's fantastic. I'm so grateful with him. Or Pavel. The film about the early humans, Pavel read it.
Yep.
And this how he killed me. This how he killed me in his Polish.
Yes, it is Polish.
This is you know, I'm sure it's interesting. It's just a universe I don't give a damn about. And
yeah, wow. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. Somewhere in the middle. I'm sorry, I can't really see that.
Understand.
How do I follow that?
The early humans, Pavel read it.
Yep.
And this how he killed me. This how he killed me in his Polish.
Yes, it is Polish.
This is you know, I'm sure it's interesting. It's just a universe. You trusted collaborators that are mean to you, and that is fundamental. There's nothing meaner to me than, for instance, Guillermo del Toro. No, and it's fantastic. I'm so grateful with him. Or Pavel, the film about the early humans, Pavel read it.
Yep.
And this how he killed me. This how he killed me in his Polish.
Yes, it is Polish.
This is you know, I'm sure it's interesting. It's just a universe I don't give a damn about. And
yeah, wow. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. Somewhere in the middle. I'm sorry, I can't really see that.
How do I follow that? You talked about 5 moments, and something I completely agree with cinema. Like, what were the 5 moments that guided you through Gravity?
wow, I guess it was triggering the whole thing into her getting lost in space. And pretty much it was probably 3 moments. It was because there was a point in which we wanted just to do a whole film. The whole very first idea of Jonas, and I betrayed, is that there was not going to be any other character that we see. But there was no, the George Clooney character was only going to be the center character. and it was mostly about her getting lost in space and keep on rolling and rolling and rolling into the void. And it pretty much was that, and then getting back into I remember we talking about getting lost, and we were talking with the tools that we had there, that we knew that they existed in over there. There was the Hubble telescope, the International Space Station, the Soyuz, and the Chinese station. Because the Chinese station, when we were doing it, they had just launched it, and we figured that by the time we finished the movie, it would be completed, and now even felt, You see at the end that the Tiangong goes into the atmosphere, and there are photos of that. It's fantastic. It's fantastic because it happened.
Yeah, it echoed.
It's not a good thing, probably.
No, it echoed.
And so those were the moments, and then the whole thing of her coming back in her. But yeah, it was pretty much structure about the bases. We used to go like the bases that we had available in space.
In reality.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any other hands up? Can I see?
But each one, then what we discuss is in each one of those bases, what was the emotional value of each one of those? Well, one is a sense of rebirth. Another is another is a moment of gestation, and at the end is pretty much the moment of birth,
of reincarnation. Yeah. At the back, somebody's there with a mic.
Hi, I really loved what you said about when you did the Harry Potter, how joy-filled it was. And I wondered for you as a writer, how important is joy to you?
Oh, yeah, that joy is the thing that has to lead the process, and that's if I have to define the moments of joy in the process of filmmaking for me is writing. Again, because the moment that you are alone, there are no limitations. There's no constraint of time. There's no constraint of money, unless you have to pay the rent and then you have to deliver the draft. And that is that is the moment. And it's not only Harry Potter. It's just every single moment of writing. It's just I love when you get lost, and if you're if you have to travel, instead of falling asleep in the plane or watching a movie that is fantastic to watch bad movies in planes. Not good movies, bad movies, and you cry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lack of oxygen. Yeah. Lack of oxygen. It does wonders.
Yeah, it's because of, know that when you're flying, you cry, and so it's great. But you even don't do that because you just want to keep on writing.
Yeah.
And it's just such an amazing thing, and you just get lost in that zone. Because from then on everything goes downhill.
Yes.
It's just the rest of the process is painful.
Yes. It's the only moment of infinite possibility because everything after that is an interpretation. Yeah. There's somebody up at the back, I believe. Yes.
Me.
So they're just up there.
So the word cinema and cinematic gets thrown around all the time. And I just want to know what it is to you. What is cinema to you? What are those elements?
Yeah, for me, it's this language in which that is a language in its own right, in which all of these other things around are just tools for the sake of that language. And what I'm saying is that you have seen, and there are expressions of amazing films and masterpieces that have been done without sound, without music, without color, without actors, even without stories. But there are not one single masterpiece that has been done without images, and this is the thing, is the image as a image flowing in time, and is this thing of how what matters are those images flowing in time, and whatever is there that is represented is I'm not really interested in illustrated stories, and that's the easy thing of a lot of the series are fantastic, and I love watching them because I can watch most of them with my eyes closed. I can be doing stuff and I'm following the show. Once in a while I come back and I stop and go back a little bit and say, oh wow, yeah, but most of, I have to say, most of contemporary mainstream cinema is the kind of cinema that you enter the theater, you get your popcorn, you sit down, the lights go off, you close your eyes, you eat your popcorn, the movie ends and you didn't miss one beat. It's more like, again, it's more like books for lazy people. And when it's about cinematic is when the dance between the elements are greater than the sum of the elements. And that is what is amazing. That is what I consider cinematic.
Thank you. Time for two more. And somebody's very patiently waited down here. The microphone's there, so we'll take that question, and then the last one will be down here at the front. Thank you.
Hey, Alfonso, thank you for the inspirational conversation. I just had a question about the process of making the films. When you did now the film with Netflix, Roma, was the process different than when you do it with a classical studio? Did they try to influence it in any way, or you had the complete freedom?
No, the film was not produced by Netflix. The film was produced by Esperanto Filmog and Participant Media. Then we sold it to Netflix for distribution. They're completely different. I mean, but even if I have done a film with Netflix, originals, they have financed it from the beginning, that wouldn't change anything. I mean, do you change how you do your films if it's going to be produced by Warner Brothers or 20th Century Fox? I think it's so important to stop, separate, those are economic models again. Those are just, it's just, it had nothing to do with the work of cinema. I think that, by the way, it's a film that is shot in 65 millimeters with Dolby Atmos. Obviously, it was not film that I will do is meant to be seen in a telephone. If somebody chooses to see it like that, well, that's their choice. But I hope that people that care about the art of cinema, they will want to see it in a big screen. As I hope that, please, if you happen to see Roma, please try to see it in a big screen.
Absolutely. Last question down here on the front.
This corresponds to the previous question about what is cinema and a cinematic language. Your cinematic language, especially Roma, is very soulful. It has a kind of grace. And I wondered if that's an element that you consciously feed into the writing, or it's just something that comes out of you naturally and you don't think about it, this soul.
I don't really think about it. I think about the elements. I think a lot about the elements that are going to compress the thing. And most of those elements are in the screenplay. And that's the thing. That's what I love with screenwriting. I don't consider myself a writer because I don't know if I could write a book. Because what I try to write is to provide those elements in the page that can be transformed into a cinematic experience. And I love the combination of sounds and characters and dialogue, but also of the context of everything that is around. So, but also in the page, I try to describe a sense of time. I'm not a believer of the economic writing, and maybe it's wrong, is the economic writing of that is just minimum description, dialogue, minimum description. Because I feel that sometimes lies in terms of the flow of time. I prefer that if it's going to be something that at the end is going to last, say, 4 minutes, is represented
on the page.
on the page.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
it's and that is what I don't love screenplays when they just describe that there's going to be a very big battle and they just fill words to convey a sense of battle, because a battle itself is a structure in time.
Yes.
So even again, as if the director is not going to follow every single one of the beats, that in the page to have that sense of the rhythm and how that battle is going to flow.
It's not enough to say the army marches into town.
There you go.
Yeah. Just before we finish, I wanted to ask you, Alfonso, what your contemporary self now would say to your younger self if you had one word of advice.
You guys always do that.
What would you say?
I'm the worst giving advice.
What would you say?
Talk to Guillermo.
That's a good piece of advice. Yeah. Talk to Guillermo. On that happy note, I'm sure Guillermo's ready to take everyone's calls. I would just like to say from all of our hearts, thank you so much. You have been so generous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank you.
joyful, man. So,
talk to Guillermo. On that happy note, I'm sure Guillermo's ready to take everyone's calls. I would just like to say from all of our hearts, thank you so much. You have been so generous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank you.
joyful, man.
Charlie Cavell, and I'm a writer and now sometimes actor. I wrote a film called Burn, 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 and then that script was sent to Russell T Davies and Nikki Shinder when they were looking for new writers to write on Banana, which was a companion piece to a show that Russell wrote called Cucumber for Channel 4. And they were very generous, and they basically said, would you like to be in an episode that you write? So I just thought that was how TV works. It's not. So I kind of transitioned that way, I suppose, and I wrote something that I then acted. And I think it was Banana that got me an interview for The End of the Fucking World, which I then wrote. And I think since writing's got busier,
it's really 3 parts. The first part is research. Even if it's a science fiction film or a fantasy film, I do a lot of research. That's reading books, interviewing people, all sorts of things. I usually do that for at least a month if I can. Just try to absorb as much information as possible.
Well, I tend to research a lot. So, I mean, quite often I'll choose a project because it's something I'm interested in, and then I'll buy 20, 30 books from Amazon or from a bookshop and just completely immerse myself in that world first.
I think the first rule of screenwriting for me is that I never have an idea for a screenplay and then just write it. So I always live with the ideas I've had for a long time.
There's a long period before I write anything down. That's usually driven by character. Just somebody I'm thinking about, a situation I'm thinking about. It's often a central conflict a person has with a another person, the situation, you know, that will root around there for a long time.
I mean, you start with a spark. You start with some idea that seems like it might go someplace, and I play with it. The analog really is very much to a painter or a sketch. I sit at the computer and I play with an idea that interests me.
Then I do cards. In the old days, I literally used to write down ideas for scenes, you know, on an index card, and I would color code them for different characters and put them on a cork board.
Then I tend to do a card system where I'll read the book and break it down, because I tend to do adaptations a lot. I remember when I was doing Warhorse, I had like 3 bits of information: the whole breakdown of the book, the breakdown of the screenplay that Lee Hoare had originally written, and the breakdown of the stage play, and there was lots of card work.
But now there's a variety of programs that I use. I use one on my iPad, and it just emulates the old cards, and you can drag and drop them, and that's just a little easier.
Suddenly, I've got something that's starting to resemble a story, and then I see where the holes are, and then I start writing dialogue, and then I write more cards.
And then for the cards, I go to an outline.
My outlines are worthless, though. I'll get about a quarter of the way into a script and realize the rest of the outline is worthless, and I have to just sort of pick my way forward. My ultimate destination rarely changes that dramatically. I usually know where I'm heading. It's a bit like a road trip. Like, you know where you're starting, you know where you're ending, and you think you know what cities you're going to visit along the way.
I do work from an outline as long as possible, but based on the theory that to screw up an outline is less heartbreaking than to screw up a screenplay. And somehow I like to hold off writing a screenplay for as long as possible.
And typically, I guess for a film, the outline will be anywhere from 20 to 30 pages. And that's usually the most exhaustive sort of, depressing part, because that's where you actually have to figure out A to B to C what comes next. And from the outline, I go to script.
Do I have a method for developing characters? If I can hear their voices, I don't mean that to sound pretentious, but either I can or I can't hear someone's voice. And if I can hear their voice, then I can talk in their voice in my head. And as soon as I have that, then I can find a way in.
I know that some writers will sit down and they will write kind of character biographies or things like that, and I don't do that. I start through plot in terms of who they are and what they're doing, and then inevitably what happens while I'm writing the script, the character kind of, bubbles to the surface. And then quite a few times I'll end up changing the plot based on having discovered the character, and I'll realize, oh, I'm not sure the character would do that, so now I have to go back and change that.
I think you start off knowing them quite well, but also with each draft you get to know them better. So dialogue for me in the first few drafts tends to be a little bit of a discovery of the character. So the character will tend to over talk, and then with each draft they talk less and less because I sort of know them better, and I don't need to discover them through the dialogue. I mean, my main writing trick is that I just write an enormous amount. So if I've decided that someone has a sister and that sister's going to be a key part of it, I will write 20 pages of him talking to his sister, and the relationship between them and the characters of them will slowly emerge during the course of the day, and then I'll read it back and think, oh, there I came across something interesting. When I start tomorrow, that'll be my starting point.
I'm sketching all the time, and most of the sketching is dialogue. And the reason I'm sketching that way is because I want the characters to rise. I mean, the writers always talk about the characters taking over their story, taking over the film, and it really is true. They need to come alive. The movie is going to be about them.
That sounds very touchy-feely, but I meditate.
I'm going to go check the soup.